Well, welcome in, Alabama fans and Auburn fans, to another Tigers and Tide video podcast where we will break down the season and try to predict the outcome of the Iron Bowl. I know that's kind of risky to do halfway through the season. That's what you do when you have a website where you talk about Tigers and Tide football all the time. You look at stats and you predict games and you try to figure out what's going to happen. And we've hit some homers this year. I've predicted a couple of interesting wins and losses. Probably most notably was predicting the Alabama blowout of A&M. Very proud of that one. Nevertheless, we'll take a dive right into the stats, and what we've done is taken the first half of the season, the stats from Alabama and Auburn, and we're going to compare them head to head. This is very similar to a process that I do when I'm trying to predict the outcomes of games every week, where we do game predictions and we do cover the spread predictions and those type things. It's something very similar to this, and I use stats from an awesome website, sportsreference.com. Sportsreference.com. You should definitely go check those guys out if you're into stats and you're all nerdy like we are at Tigers and Tide. Well, let's jump right into it. These top set of stats that you're looking at right up here, this is going to be with Auburn on offense and Alabama on defense, and then vice versa underneath. We will take a look at Alabama on offense and Auburn on defense. A few key stats that we'll look at. We won't dive too deep into it. First of all, Auburn on offense, rushing yards averaged per game, 225. Which I'll be honest, this passing now is maybe even a tad higher, or definitely comparable to last year. Auburn is just not a passing team, although they've attempted to pull that off this year. You can argue how much success they've had or have not had. I think the argument would have to fall on the side they haven't been that successful. Nick Marshall, I tell you, he has the potential to be a great downfield passer, but Short passes, over the middle passes, he struggled with, and this year he's had a huge struggle with balls being batted down, tipped, and intercepted. Nevertheless, 225 on average, and Alabama giving up 198. Put those stats together, it looks at Auburn somewhere on average if these teams met several times, and that's what statistics do. They try to give you an average of what might happen if teams played each other 3, 4, 5, or 6 times. That's why in any one game things can go awry one way or the other, but it gives you some kind of an idea. Basically what it boils down to is if each team played their average game against each other, what would happen? 212, which is not the most outstanding passing yards for a game that I've ever seen. Touchdowns, passing touchdowns, not too bad. The problem is that Alabama's pretty stingy on that aspect. Auburn averaging 2.2 passing touchdowns a game. Alabama giving up 0.9. So we would expect in a head-to-head battle for Auburn to pull off about 1.55 passing touchdowns per game against Alabama. Rushing a little bit better for Auburn, putting up 262, which is somewhat respectable, I guess. I don't think it quite lives up to Auburn's standards, but it's pretty close comparing to last year. The problem that you run into so far this year is Alabama ball hawking, man, and especially when it comes to the rush defense. And you can see allowing on average 62 points a game now. They've had a couple of games that really boost those numbers, but still, if you're not playing your 100% A game against Alabama, you're going to have problems running, and you could see that happen if the Iron Bowl were played today. Keep in mind, kids, if the Iron Bowl were played today is where these stats come from. Anyway, under that scenario, pretty weak for Auburn, 162. Now, let me tell you, if Alabama holds Auburn to 162 yards rushing, if that somehow happens, it's not going to be a pretty game in Bryant-Denny Stadium. Auburn is averaging 2.2 on rushing, and if you thought Alabama was stingy on passing, boy, look at their allowing rushing touchdowns, 0.3 a game, which really slices into those numbers. If you take these two numbers and add them together, your average touchdowns passing and rushing per game, you're going to get 2.8 multiplied times 7. It's going to give you around 20, a little less than 20, 19.6, 19.7, something like that. And I like to tack on a field goal to kind of round it out. That puts Auburn putting up 23 points on offense. Auburn doesn't generally win putting up 23 points on offense. Now, a big reason for that, Auburn hasn't had that dynamic of a defense in several years. The defense is slowly getting better. You're seeing some signs of life. They still haven't put a package on the field completely together this year. But I'm somewhat optimistic that we may see that before the year is over, and hopefully the sooner the better. If we flip the script and put Alabama on offense, Auburn on defense, 288 yards passing. Blake Sims, and we have another video that I'll try to link to here in this article if you want to go check it out, where it compares Sims to A.J. McCarron and Greg McElroy. Blake Sims has been a beast in terms of passing and efficiency as a quarterback this year. He just really has. Auburn's pass defense, not horrible, not fantastic, but we could expect an average on 250 yards a game. If you want to compare that head-to-head with Auburn's passing, you're looking at 250 to 212, which would not be pretty for Auburn. Still, Auburn's defense is really stingy in the passing game. They have been all season. 2.3 Alabama's averaging, but Auburn only giving up 0.7, which is actually better than the Tide's defense. So we would expect about 1.5 touchdowns from the passing game from the Tide. That's good news for Auburn. On the rushing side of the ball, rushing hasn't been all that great. And I got to tell you, the stats from this last game really boosted those numbers because they were worse before. If the trend that happened against the Aggies were to continue, these numbers could explode. So it's interesting to look at them at this point in the season. But Auburn not nearly as stingy against the rush as Alabama is. You can see Alabama 16.2. The Auburn defense 120. Doesn't bode well for the Auburn Tigers against the rushing game according to the statistics. And if we look at touchdowns, you would expect Alabama to be able to put up about 2 of those on average per game, which is good for 14 points, of course. If we add all this together, you're going to come up with about 3.5 touchdowns. That's going to put Alabama somewhere in the 25 range, 24, 25 range, something like that. And then we tack on a field goal on the end of that, you're looking at 28. So our statistical score estimate would be somewhere in the 28 to 23 favor of Alabama. My Auburn fans are going to kill me right now. Don't jump through the screen and attack me. Look, when it's that close, it's a statistical tie. When you add in the fact that we're given the, and I like to do this in any game where I'm averaging this, you want to tack on a field goal. Sometimes depending on the team, tack on a couple of field goals. And that could be the difference here. We could see Auburn get a couple, and then Alabama's notorious for missing some if they have to. Boy, we don't have to remind you about last season. I know I don't have to remind the Alabama fans. And then this season has been plagued with as well. Look, if this game were close and it came down to a battle of field goals, I got to go edge Auburn. If it doesn't come down close to where it's a field goal game, then the edge goes to Alabama. It's nearly a statistical tie, but I'm not going to pull punches because I'm an Auburn fan. I'm going to tell you straight up by the numbers right now. This predicts that Alabama would win the Iron Bowl if it were played today.